All right, hello everyone out there. I am Thomas. Welcome to my channel. I do educational videos. Today we're doing this 50-second video on the reciprocal system of theory. It's a theory of everything arrived at by Dewey B. Larson back in the 20th century. The gist of the matter is that he was attempting to articulate some principles. He was attempting to he was a mining engineer, and he was trying to come up with more. He was doing work on the side at night, trying to research different things that maybe would be fruitful for scientific discovery. And he stumbled upon a few different ideas, and he worked it out over 25 years and developed these two fundamental postulates. And the first fundamental postulate is by far more important. And the gist of it is that whereas Newton would say, or Newton and before, all the way back to the Greeks, would say that the universe is made out of matter or atoms. And Einstein comes along with equals mc squared, and he says, well, it looks like it's made out of matter, but that's really energy. And energy can be converted to matter and vice versa. The universe is made out of energy. And Larson comes along a little bit later and says, no, if equals mc squared, that means that neither matter nor energy can be the most fundamental thing in the universe. And Larson says that the most fundamental thing in the universe is motion. The universe is made out of motion. And motion is, which other people have come up with, but Larson kind of redefined motion in order to forward his theory further than everybody else. And that was that motion is the relationship between space and time. Space and time are reciprocals of each other. They have the same qualities, that being three, and I would say 3 or 4 dimensions, as well as progressing. And they are both quantized, meaning that they both have a minimum unit, a minimum singular unit. And when you have 1 unit of space in 1 unit of time, that is the speed of light. So speed of light is 1 unit of space in 1 unit of time. And so he then wrote many, many books on physics and astrophysics and chemistry and astronomy and even economics. Over the course of his life. He died in 1990. Then after he died, his wife put out this book that we're studying right now called Beyond Space and Time. And this book, Beyond Space and Time, delves into metaphysics. So it's primarily about philosophy and religion and psychology. And the basic gist of that, he had to arrive at a few other fundamental postulates for that. But and he arrives at these postulates, and then he builds the universe step by step through a process of deduction. In this, what he's really saying is that whereas Einstein is saying that the speed of light is the maximum speed of the universe, for Larson, the speed of light is the midpoint of the universe, or the neutral point. And there's half of the universe that's moving actually faster than the speed of light. He calls that the cosmic sector. We don't have really too much reach into that region to be able to understand it fully. But since space and time are reciprocals of each other, we can take what we know from the slower than the speed of light region, which he calls the material sector, or sector 1. And we can, by switching the roles of space and time, we can apply it to sector 2, or the faster than speed of light region that he calls the cosmic sector. So the sector 1, which is atoms and molecules, sector 2 which is faster than the speed of light. And then he also says that there is sector 3, which is independent of space and time. I would argue that that is really this light realm, because if you look at the relativistic equations from Lorentz, and they indicate that at the speed of light, time stops. So we've got sector 1, sector 2, and sector 3. Sector 1 builds by aggregation. Particles and molecules and atoms glom onto each other, like on like, and eventually they get to its most complicated, complex form, which is DNA. DNA is billions and billions of atoms per molecule. So at that level of complexity, the DNA becomes eligible to be taken control over by a cosmic entity. And this cosmic entity can take control over the DNA, and that creates what he calls the life unit. So life is a combination of a material and cosmic unification. And then when this life unit gets more and more complex, starting from the amoeba to the bacteria all the way up, and when it gets to its most complex, which he calls the intelligent human or humanoid, then that becomes eligible to be under the overall control of this sector 3 that is a more general thing that is entirely outside of space and time. And so that is what he calls the ethical human. And when the sector 3 unit takes control, it is not a total control, because the life unit is already under control of the sector 2 unit, which governs survival. And this sector 3 unit governs ethical behavior. So there are times when the ethical behavior and the survival behavior dovetail and they work together. But then there are also times where the sector 2 and 3 component are in competition. And at that point, I guess the human being has to decide what to do. Now, we've just gone through a few chapters where Larson is looking at communication from sector 3, and that it's in certain circumstances, sector 3 will communicate with the sector 2 unit through things like ESP, intuition, scientific insight, and religious revelation. And that those are really all the same thing, but they are kind of translated differently. But they're all communications from sector 3 through sector 3 channels. Now we're on chapter 13 that has to do with emotions. And emotions, we're going back to sector 2. Emotions is a sector 2 process that is kind of like on the way toward intelligent thinking. Okay, so we're going to take over here in the middle of chapter 13. But although he's distinguishing between emotion and thinking, because he says that the emotion, particularly the fear emotion, is useless, because the fear emotion is just a generalized thing which can be really replaced by thinking, which is much more specific. And so that's where he is right now. But although emotion and thinking serve essentially the same purposes within the more limited range of the emotions, they operate on entirely different principles. In thinking, a given situation is perceived as a combination of a number of factors. Possible means of manipulating or responding to these factors are envisioned, and a decision or judgment is reached as to the most desirable course of action. In the emotional process, the situation in its entirety is perceived as being one of a certain class. The action appropriate to that class of situation then follows automatically. As this description indicates, emotion is a very simple process so far as its essential elements are concerned. It is therefore easy to see how emotions could have originated at a relatively early evolutionary stage. Indeed, such behavior as that of plants, which respond to light by turning toward the source, is not fundamentally different from resorting to flight as a response to a threatening situation. Just how and at what stage of evolutionary development thinking first made its appearance is not yet known, but it clearly plays no significant role in any biological species other than the higher animals. Thus, emotion was already highly developed before thinking had any real impact, and the thinking apparatus originated from a separate line of development. As a result, the human brain is not a single organ, but a complex structure in which the evidence of a new mechanism superimposed on an older brain is clear enough, in spite of some integration of functions that has resulted from further evolution after the original combination to give rise to designations such as the old or reptilian brain and the new or mammalian brain, which is in itself a double structure. Okay, then he goes into some analysis from other experts. And then finally, he says the availability of a more efficient and versatile apparatus, such as thinking, can be expected to lead to a gradual decrease in the utilization of the emotional mechanism, perhaps to its eventual disappearance. This process is already underway, but the clear superiority of the thinking process over the emotional mechanism was achieved only a relatively short time ago on the evolutionary scale, and not enough time has elapsed to accomplish a major evolutionary change. Furthermore, the availability of a simple process that can handle some routine situations lightens the load on the thinking apparatus, and this useful function that the emotional mechanism is able to perform no doubt tends to make the phasing out of the emotions still slower. But this is not likely to change the ultimate result because of the major role that the availability of accurate information plays in determining the validity of the conclusions reached through the reasoning process. The position of reason vis-a-vis emotion continually improves as the amount of information at the disposal of the individual increases. The new and better mechanism will no doubt take over the entire job, or at least assume full control sooner or later. In the meantime, however, both intelligence and emotion are endeavoring to control the response to perceived situations. Okay, now he goes into a little bit of more literature review. And emotion is not some mysterious, inimical force by which we are victimized. It is simply an automatic reaction of man's primitive brain, a reaction that cannot be prevented as long as that brain continues to be operated, but can be overruled by intelligence. The substantial degree of progress that has already been achieved towards suppression of the emotional reactions is illustrated in the human response to the emotion of anger. Inasmuch as the survival of an individual in the animal world not only requires quick retreat from danger, but also promptness in seizing opportunities to gain or to preserve an advantage over the other animals with which it competes for food and other necessities. Evolution has produced an emotion analogous to fear that initiates attack rather than retreat. This emotion is anger. This emotion, anger, is in a sense a direct opposition of fear. In the lower animals, the response to anger is purely situation oriented. An intruder is attacked simply because he intrudes. In the more intelligent species, particularly man, an objectionable situation is not in itself sufficient to produce an angry reaction. Human anger is aroused mainly where the affected individual objects to the reasons, or what he believes to be the reasons, for the situation. An injury resulting from the actions of another person will usually be accepted unemotionally if it is judged to be unavoidable, or in most cases, even if it is merely unintentional. But if the injury results from carelessness, the victim is likely to become angry. And if it is intentional, some degree of anger is inevitable. Furthermore, that which is judged to be intentional may produce anger, even if the injury is trivial or is actually avoided. Anger is typically correlated with the impulse to attack, and in the lower animals, attack is essentially automatic. But in man, it is the exception rather than the rule. Ordinarily, the attack response to anger is vetoed by reason, either on the ground that it would be counterproductive, in that it would provoke the antagonist to inflict still further injury, or on the ground that retaliation under the existing circumstances would be contrary to accepted standards of conduct and would impair the individual's standing in the community. This overruling of emotional response by intelligent thought is not always accomplished easily and often generates internal conflicts of a disturbing nature. In human beings, where the rational response is the normal one, the conflicts are more frequent and more violent in the case of those individuals who are in the habit of giving relatively free rein to their emotions. Thus, the type of difficulty known as emotional disturbance is correlated with the relative strength of the emotions. On the other hand, in animals where emotion predominates, a higher degree of intelligence and the resultant greater ability to recognize deviations from the standard pattern to which the emotional response is geared means more occasion for conflict and consequently more emotional disturbance. Okay. So anger, he's saying, is the opposite of, mainly the opposite of fear. I don't really see, animals don't often seem to display anger even when they're attacking. But that's what he says. And, but he's really just contrasting the differences between emotions and thinking. And thinking has some restraints on it, and is inevitably going to replace emotions entirely, he says. And now he's going back into some more behavioral stuff having to do with evolution, and okay. Thus far, we have been considering only the primary emotions, the crude emotions. In dealing with the emotions of the lower animals, this is as far as we can go. There is no reliable indication that these creatures are subject to any other emotions. They are subject to internal disturbances due to inability to achieve strongly desired objectives, and the resulting state of frustration is frequently called an emotion. Unlike fear and anger, however, frustration is a consequence of the existing situation rather than a mechanism for initiating the proper response to that situation. It is therefore something of a different basic nature. But in the higher animals, there are signs of certain other physiological states that have enough resemblance to the states induced by fear and anger to justify considering them as related to the primary emotions. And in human individuals, these physiological states are of a more complex character and more recent evolutionary origin are many and varied. Some of these are merely modifications or extensions of fear and anger. Hate, for example, is a less acute form of anger that is maintained over a long period of time. Jealousy is another emotion of a similar nature that may be only a very mild reaction or may have an intensity anywhere up to a murderous rage. There are, however, a number of other states usually classified as emotions which have quite different characteristics. The members of one pair, joy and sadness, are so easily recognizable and so widely experienced that they are often included among the primary emotions. But the difference between joy and sadness on the one hand and fear and anger on the other hand are differences in kind rather than merely differences in details. Fear and anger initiate action. That is, they are related to what will happen. Joy and sadness are related to what has already happened. They do not call for any action of any kind, and apparently involve nothing more than a physiological reaction to events that have already occurred. Okay, we're going to stop right there. I will point out that Bruce Perret, one of Larson's followers, has done other work on emotions, and Bruce Perret disagrees with quite a few of the things that Larson says in this book, and we will eventually talk about those things as well. But we'll get on to the next one. Have a great day. We'll see you later.